Welcome to Framework, the podcast that makes the NIST cybersecurity framework practical, engaging, and accessible. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, business leader, or simply curious about how organizations defend against cyber threats, this series is for you. This podcast is inspired by a comprehensive guide to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, a best-selling resource written by cybersecurity expert Dr. Jason Edwards and trusted by professionals worldwide. In each episode, we'll leverage a few insights from Jason's extensive book to dive deep into CSF 2.0, unpacking every function, category, and subcategory with real-world applications you can immediately use. If you're enjoying this episode and want to learn more, head over to cyberauthor.me to grab your copy of the book and access additional resources to enhance your cybersecurity journey. You can also visit baremetalcyber.com, where over 2 million people last year explored expert insights, articles, and practical tools across a wide range of cybersecurity topics. ID.RA-08, Handling Vulnerability Disclosures. ID.RA-08 ensures that organizations develop and implement structured processes for receiving, analyzing, and responding to cybersecurity vulnerability disclosures, whether they originate from internal security teams, external researchers, or third-party vendors. This subcategory belongs to the Identify function within the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, version 2.0, emphasizing that organizations must establish clear policies and procedures for handling vulnerability reports, verifying security weaknesses, and coordinating remediation efforts to protect systems and data from exploitation. Without a structured vulnerability disclosure process, organizations risk failing to detect critical security flaws, delaying remediation efforts, and allowing attackers to exploit known vulnerabilities before patches or mitigations are deployed. By handling vulnerability disclosures effectively, organizations ensure that cybersecurity teams receive timely reports about security weaknesses, assess the severity of identified vulnerabilities, and implement fixes before malicious actors can exploit them. A structured approach to vulnerability disclosure enables organizations to collaborate with security researchers, engage with industry vulnerability coordination programs, and establish trusted communication channels for responsible disclosure. Organizations that adopt vulnerability reporting mechanisms, enforce structured verification and validation workflows, and integrate remediation efforts into cybersecurity governance, improve their ability to detect, prioritize, and resolve security flaws efficiently. Multiple stakeholders play a role in handling vulnerability disclosures. Cybersecurity and risk management teams are responsible for analyzing reported vulnerabilities, determining their potential impact, and coordinating mitigation strategies. Business executives and compliance officers ensure that vulnerability disclosure policies align with regulatory requirements, industry best practices, and enterprise risk management objectives. Security researchers, third-party vendors, and ethical hackers contribute by identifying and reporting vulnerabilities, working with organizations to ensure that security flaws are disclosed responsibly and remediated effectively. Handling vulnerability disclosures is implemented through structured vulnerability reporting frameworks, dedicated disclosure management platforms, and coordinated vulnerability remediation processes. This includes establishing formal vulnerability disclosure policies, creating secure submission channels for reporting security flaws, and integrating vulnerability management workflows into enterprise cybersecurity governance. Organizations that fail to handle vulnerability disclosures effectively risk overlooking critical security flaws, responding too slowly to discovered vulnerabilities, and failing to meet compliance requirements for responsible disclosure and security patching. Several key terms define vulnerability disclosure management and its role in cybersecurity governance. Responsible disclosure ensures that organizations establish clear policies for security researchers and external entities to report vulnerabilities ethically and securely. Coordinated vulnerability disclosure, CVD, ensures that organizations work collaboratively with third parties, vendors, and industry groups to verify vulnerabilities, communicate risks, and deploy patches in a controlled manner. Vulnerability reporting channels ensure that organizations provide secure, well-documented methods for submitting security vulnerability reports, reducing the risk of unauthorized disclosure. Patch management and remediation ensure that organizations prioritize and deploy security fixes for disclosed vulnerabilities, ensuring that known security flaws are mitigated before they can be exploited. Public and private disclosure policies ensure that organizations define when and how vulnerabilities are disclosed to the public, balancing transparency with security risk management. Challenges in handling vulnerability disclosures often lead to delays in security patching, poor communication with security researchers, and failure to align vulnerability disclosure policies with cybersecurity governance. One common issue is lack of a formalized disclosure process, where organizations lack structured workflows for verifying and responding to security flaw reports, leading to inconsistent handling of vulnerability disclosures. Another issue is delayed vulnerability validation, where organizations take too long to assess reported security flaws, increasing the risk of cyber attacks before patches can be deployed. Some organizations mistakenly believe that vulnerability disclosures harm reputation, without recognizing that having a well-defined disclosure policy strengthens trust with customers, partners, and the security research community. When organizations implement structured vulnerability disclosure processes, they enhance cybersecurity risk awareness, improve security flaw remediation efforts, and ensure that security vulnerabilities are addressed before they can be exploited by malicious actors. A structured disclosure management framework ensures that cybersecurity teams assess vulnerabilities before public release. Business leadership aligns vulnerability disclosure policies with enterprise risk strategies, and security teams implement rapid remediation measures to minimize security exposure. Organizations that adopt automated vulnerability intake and tracking solutions, enforce structured, responsible disclosure policies, and integrate security flaw remediation into cybersecurity governance develop a comprehensive vulnerability handling strategy that strengthens resilience against evolving cybersecurity threats. Organizations that fail to handle vulnerability disclosures effectively face significant security, operational, and compliance risks. Without structured vulnerability reporting and response mechanisms, businesses risk missing critical security flaws, delaying remediation efforts, and exposing systems to cyber attacks that exploit known vulnerabilities. A common issue is lack of a clear vulnerability disclosure policy, where organizations do not provide security researchers or employees with a formal process for reporting security flaws, leading to confusion and inconsistent handling of disclosures. Another major challenge is delayed vulnerability remediation, where organizations acknowledge security flaws but take too long to validate and deploy fixes. By implementing structured vulnerability disclosure processes, organizations ensure that security teams receive timely reports about potential threats, assess their severity efficiently, and take immediate action to remediate vulnerabilities before they can be weaponized. A well-defined disclosure management framework improves response times, strengthens collaboration with ethical hackers and security researchers, and ensures that vulnerabilities are patched before they can cause harm. Organizations that deploy automated vulnerability intake systems, enforce structured security flaw validation workflows, and integrate coordinated vulnerability disclosure programs into enterprise cybersecurity governance improve their ability to detect, prioritize, and resolve security flaws efficiently. At the partial tier, organizations lack structured vulnerability disclosure processes, leading to ad hoc vulnerability reporting, inconsistent security flaw validation, and delayed remediation efforts. Vulnerability handling is reactive, with organizations only addressing security flaws when they are discovered by attackers or result in security breaches. A small business at this level may fail to provide employees or security researchers with a method to report vulnerabilities, leading to unpatched security gaps in their network infrastructure. At the risk-informed tier, organizations begin to develop structured vulnerability disclosure processes, ensuring that security teams have formal workflows for assessing and remediating reported vulnerabilities. However, vulnerability response efforts may still be limited, with inconsistent prioritization of security flaws and delayed coordination with security researchers. A mid-size financial services firm at this level may implement a security flaw reporting system, but fail to validate or patch vulnerabilities in a timely manner, leaving exposed systems vulnerable to known attack vectors. At the repeatable tier, organizations implement a fully structured vulnerability disclosure framework, ensuring that security teams continuously receive, validate, and remediate reported vulnerabilities based on risk severity. Vulnerability disclosure governance is formalized, with leadership actively involved in reviewing disclosure policies and ensuring that security flaw reports are handled efficiently. A technology company at this stage may operate a dedicated vulnerability disclosure program, allowing ethical hackers to submit security flaws, rewarding responsible disclosures, and ensuring that all reported vulnerabilities are tracked and resolved within set time frames. At the adapted tier, organizations employ AI-driven vulnerability detection, real-time security flaw analysis, and automated remediation workflows to dynamically assess, prioritize, and mitigate reported vulnerabilities based on evolving cyber threats. Vulnerability disclosure is fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that security teams can dynamically adjust security controls, collaborate with security researchers, and enhance remediation processes in real time. A multinational cloud services provider at this level may use automated vulnerability scanning tools to validate reported security flaws, dynamically generate patches for detected vulnerabilities, and deploy fixes across its infrastructure with minimal disruption. Handling vulnerability disclosures aligns with multiple controls in the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-53, ensuring that organizations implement structured security flaw detection, disclosure governance, and vulnerability remediation models. One key control is SI-4, Information System Monitoring, which requires organizations to continuously monitor their systems for security flaws, ensuring that reported vulnerabilities are detected, validated, and addressed promptly. A global logistics company implementing this control may use continuous monitoring solutions to detect and assess vulnerabilities in its supply chain management software, ensuring that security weaknesses are remediated before they can be exploited. Another key control is CM-8, System Component Inventory, which mandates that organizations maintain an up-to-date inventory of software, hardware, and third-party services to track vulnerabilities associated with each system component. A multinational retail corporation implementing this control may map disclosed vulnerabilities to specific systems in its infrastructure, ensuring that affected components are patched or replaced based on risk severity. Handling vulnerability disclosures also aligns with ID.RA-06 incident reporting, which requires organizations to establish structured processes for tracking, documenting, and responding to reported security vulnerabilities, ensuring that all disclosures are handled in a timely and controlled manner. This control ensures that organizations maintain clear reporting mechanisms, document all vulnerability disclosures systematically, and integrate remediation efforts into their broader incident response workflows. A multinational telecommunications company implementing this control may operate a dedicated vulnerability response team that tracks security flaw reports, coordinates with vendors and researchers, and ensures that all vulnerabilities are addressed before public disclosure. These controls can be adapted based on organizational size, industry, and cybersecurity maturity. A small business may implement basic vulnerability disclosure measures, ensuring that employees and security researchers can submit reports through a secure online form or dedicated email address, with security teams reviewing and addressing vulnerabilities manually. A large enterprise may deploy automated vulnerability intake and tracking platforms, real-time security flaw validation systems, and AI-driven risk assessment tools to ensure that all reported vulnerabilities are dynamically prioritized and remediated based on their impact and exploitability. Organizations in highly regulated industries such as finance, healthcare, and critical infrastructure may require legally mandated vulnerability disclosure policies, structured security flaw tracking processes, and strict compliance-driven remediation frameworks to ensure compliance with industry cybersecurity mandates. Auditors assess an organization's ability to handle vulnerability disclosures by reviewing whether structured, documented, and continuously enforced vulnerability reporting and remediation frameworks are in place. They evaluate whether organizations implement structured vulnerability disclosure models, enforce real-time security flaw validation policies, and integrate predictive risk impact analysis into enterprise-wide security governance strategies. If an organization fails to handle vulnerability disclosures effectively, auditors may issue findings highlighting gaps in vulnerability tracking, weak alignment between security flaw remediation efforts and enterprise risk management, and failure to integrate structured vulnerability reporting policies into cybersecurity governance frameworks. To verify compliance, auditors seek specific types of evidence. Vulnerability disclosure records and structured security flaw tracking reports demonstrate that organizations formally define and enforce structured cybersecurity vulnerability disclosure governance models. Patch management logs and security remediation tracking reports provide insights into whether organizations proactively assess, prioritize, and mitigate reported security flaws in a timely manner. Incident response evaluations related to high-risk security vulnerabilities and predictive attack simulation reports show whether organizations effectively track, monitor, and mitigate disclosed vulnerabilities before they can be exploited by attackers. A compliance success scenario could involve a global technology firm that undergoes an audit and provides evidence that cybersecurity vulnerability disclosure handling processes are fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that security teams continuously receive, validate, and remediate reported security flaws efficiently. Auditors confirm that vulnerability disclosure policies are systematically enforced, security flaw remediation efforts are dynamically adjusted based on risk severity, and enterprise-wide security policies align with structured vulnerability reporting governance requirements. In contrast, an organization that fails to implement structured vulnerability reporting models, neglects dynamic security flaw validation, or lacks formalized remediation workflows may receive audit findings for poor cybersecurity risk awareness, weak vulnerability disclosure governance, and failure to align security flaw handling strategies with regulatory compliance mandates. Organizations face multiple barriers in ensuring that cybersecurity vulnerability disclosure handling remains continuous and effective. One major challenge is lack of automation in vulnerability tracking, where organizations fail to implement real-time security flaw validation tools, leading to outdated or incomplete vulnerability remediation workflow. Another challenge is failure to align vulnerability disclosure policies with evolving cybersecurity threats, where organizations do not update security flaw reporting frameworks based on emerging exploit trends, increasing exposure to high-severity cybersecurity risks. A final challenge is over-reliance on manual vulnerability validation processes, where organizations assess security flaw reports manually instead of leveraging AI-driven vulnerability scanning and automated security flaw risk assessments. Organizations can overcome these barriers by developing structured cybersecurity vulnerability disclosure handling frameworks, ensuring that security flaw reporting and remediation strategies remain continuously optimized, and integrating real-time vulnerability tracking models into enterprise-wide cybersecurity governance strategies. Investing in automated vulnerability intake and risk scoring platforms, predictive cybersecurity risk analytics, and AI-driven security flaw validation solutions ensures that organizations dynamically assess, monitor, and refine cybersecurity vulnerability disclosure handling strategies in real time. Standardizing vulnerability disclosure governance methodologies across departments, subsidiaries, and external business partners ensures that cybersecurity flaw tracking policies are consistently applied, reducing exposure to cybersecurity threats and strengthening enterprise-wide security governance resilience. By embedding cybersecurity vulnerability disclosure handling into enterprise cybersecurity governance strategies, organizations enhance cybersecurity risk awareness, improve regulatory compliance, and ensure sustainable cybersecurity risk management strategies across evolving cyber risk landscapes. That wraps up today's discussion on framework. Don't stop here. Head over to cyberauthor.me to explore more cybersecurity topics and discover a best-selling book covering NIST and other critical cyber frameworks. Please like, rate, and review this episode on Apple and Spotify. Until next time, remember that knowledge is power.